Good afternoon. Welcome to the Analyst. Today we'll be taking up 7 newspaper articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express and discussing them. The handout for the same will be available in the description of this video for your kind perusal. Please have a look at that. The first article that we'll take up is related to India-South Africa relations and India-Africa ties, as India signed 2 pacts on submarine cooperation with South Africa. The second article is related to Shanghai Cooperation Organization, as the Defense Minister Rajnath Singh is attending the SCO Defense Ministers meeting in China. Additionally, we'll take up 5 articles in the simplified which will be helpful for your prelims and mains preparation. Now, the first article is related to India-South Africa relations and India's ties with the African continent. The pace at which India is expanding its collaboration with countries across continents after Operation Sindoor and in the times of global uncertainty is a sign of India's proactiveness in the foreign affairs. First, we sent all-party delegations across the globe conveying India's message against terrorism. Then Prime Minister Modi attended the G7 summit and we reset our ties with Canada. Now we have signed 2 pacts with South Africa for the submarine cooperation. So we will discuss the significance of India-South Africa relations, the significance of African continent for us. Can South Africa function as our gateway to enter into Africa? The challenges associated with India-Africa relations. This is important in GS2 under the topic Effect of Politics and Policies of Developed and Developing Countries on India's Interests and Indian Diaspora. Let's start with India-South Africa relations. India-South Africa have been historically connected. We have cultural ties. Gandhi started his Satyagraha from South Africa. Then he came to India. And South Africa has experienced apartheid. There was discrimination against the blacks in South Africa. And India championed the anti-apartheid efforts across multilateral fora also, for example, at the United Nations, the Non-Aligned Movement, etc. And we even imposed an embargo upon South Africa. We severed our trade relations with South Africa at that time. We were the first country to do so. And we even conferred Nelson Mandela the Bharat Ratna for his anti-apartheid efforts. And in 1993, finally, the diplomatic ties were restored. The cultural center was opened in Johannesburg. The high commissions were opened in 1994. When we look at the political relations, we signed the Strategic Partnership Agreement, famously known as the Red Fort Declaration, when Nelson Mandela was visiting India in 1997. And we have cooperation with South Africa across multilateral forums. For example, the India-Brazil-South Africa grouping, the BRICS grouping. And we have signed agreements with South Africa in various fields, including agreements in trade, defense, cultural, health, science and technology, etc. And there are various high-level meetings which are often conducted between the two countries. For example, Prime Minister Modi visited South Africa to attend the BRICS summit in 2023. Likewise, the South African President Ramaphosa also visited India to attend the G20 summit in 2023. Also, even the President of South Africa was the chief guest at our Republic Day parade in 2019. And we have defense cooperation as well with South Africa. For example, we have the Memorandum of Understanding on the Defense Cooperation signed in 2000. We have various naval engagements as well. For example, the participation in the India, Brazil, South Africa maritime exercises in 2022 and 2018. There are even port calls also, that is Indian naval ships, Sunayana and Trishul go for port calls in South Africa. The South African Navy also participated in the Milan exercise 2024. And there are military delegations also which are sent from India to South Africa and from South Africa to India. When we look at the commercial and economic relations, India-South Africa trade is significant. When we look at the fiscal year 2024, the total trade between the two countries was close to $20 billion. India exports vehicles, pharmaceutical products and engineering products to South Africa, and we import gold, coal and minerals from South Africa. There are various events also to promote the economic and commercial relations between the two countries. The conducting of India-South Africa Business Summit 2018, the holding of Digital Public Infrastructure Conference 2023, the CEOs forum meetings conducted in 2016 and 2018. There are various skill development initiatives also taken up by India to promote the skill development in South Africa. For example, the setting up of Gandhi Mandela Center of Specialization, that is to provide the training to artisans, and India's Indian Technical and Economic Cooperation Program, which provides for the media training to the South African professionals. The cultural and diaspora ties are also there between India and South Africa. The Indian Center for Cultural Relations sponsors various programs, including the celebration of International Day of Yoga in South Africa, the dance troupes, the language events, and even the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav was also celebrated in South Africa as well. In terms of diaspora, South Africa has 1.7 million people of Indian origin. That accounts for almost 3% population of South Africa. There are other areas of cooperation also. For example, we have the agreement on science and technology cooperation. This agreement was signed in 1995 and it has been renewed in 2017, so it is still in force. And we have the Cheetah Translocation Project Memorandum of Understanding also, which was signed in 2023 to translocate cheetahs, to transfer cheetahs from South Africa to India. Now, can South Africa function as our gateway to enter into Africa to deepen our economic ties with the African continent? South Africa is one of the contenders. There are various other countries also, including Mauritius, Morocco, Kenya, through which also we can deepen our ties with the African continent. Let's analyze these countries one by one. When we look at the South Africa, its strength is it is the largest economy in Africa in terms of GDP. It also has the most advanced infrastructure in terms of the development of the ports, road infrastructure, as well as the establishment of financial systems. The legal and commercial sectors in the South Africa are also strong, and it is historically seen as the entry point for the multinational companies, but it faces a few challenges. For example, there is policy instability which is often seen in South Africa. An example is in 2015, within a span of 1 week, the finance minister of South Africa was changed thrice. Likewise, when we observe the mining, there are disputes there regarding the finalization of the mining charter, which went on for quite a long time. There are regulatory hurdles which are faced in terms of the migration related laws and the enforcement of the labor laws over there. And it also faced economic stagnation for almost a decade. If we observe the FDI which was incoming into South Africa, in 2008 it was to the tune of $10 billion. It declined to almost about $2.2 billion in 2016, and after that it increased slightly, but it has been stagnating post that. And there are security concerns also in South Africa, as observed in terms of the high crime rates in South Africa, and there is uncertainty in terms of the land reforms. And when the property rights are under a cloud, then the investors naturally become anxious and they do not want to invest there because of the uncertainty regarding the probable land reforms. Also, it needs to update the digital infrastructure, it needs to upgrade the skills as well. Now, another contender for the gateway into Africa is Mauritius. Interestingly, Prime Minister Modi has invited the Prime Minister of Mauritius to visit India. It can be the financial gateway into Africa. For example, it is having the tax advantages. It does not have exchange controls, and in terms of investment, it has got a good credit rating, the investment grade credit rating, and in terms of ease of doing business also, it ranks quite high. The World Bank's ease of doing business, which was discontinued later on, in 2020 it ranked 13th, whereas South Africa's ranking was 84th. It is also seen as the private equity hub, as the private investors, they invest through Mauritius into Africa, and it also has signed various double taxation avoidance agreements with many African nations. But it faces various limitations. For example, it lacks the scale. It is not a real economy per se, it is rather seen as a financial hub, as the hub for the establishment of the offshore companies to save taxes. Therefore, it has the limited perception of being a tax haven only, rather than being a base for large scale investments. Because it has limited physical connectivity with the mainland African continent, therefore it is not a suitable alternative for manufacturing or other large-scale investments. Another contender for being the gateway to Africa can be Morocco. Morocco is seen to be a bridge between continents. It is seen as a bridge between the Europe, the Arab world and the African continent, as it has influence in the Francophone Africa, that is that region of Africa which speaks French, and it is investing in the infrastructure projects. For example, the investments in the Nigeria-Morocco gas pipeline, which will bring about development in the region. And it is also growing the trade ties with the sub-Saharan Africa as well. It also has the distinguished advantage for being able to access the Islamic finance. It has the advantage in the renewable energy as well as the agriculture sector also, particularly in the Western Africa. But it also faces various challenges. For example, it is not seen to be African. Historically, the African nations, they look at Morocco with a mistrust. It is seen as un-African. It even quit the African Union 4 decades ago and applied for the membership of the European Union, but it rejected the application for the membership. And it infamously did not support the efforts for the decolonization of South Africa and Mozambique. Therefore, it does not have a good repertoire. And it is also seen to be part of the Western Sahara dispute, and it is seen to be in occupation of the Sahrawi state. Also, there is a kind of a cultural disconnect. It is perceived that it has a superiority complex and it has a stronger affinity to the Arab or European identity rather than the affinity to the African identity. Another gateway to Africa can be Dubai as well, because it is well connected to the African continent. The connectivity can be seen in terms of the flight connectivity. There are 3 to 8 hours flights from Dubai to most of the African cities. It has a good business friendly environment also, and also the United Arab Emirates has strong trade ties with the African continent. But there are certain limitations also. For example, it is not physically situated in Africa. Therefore, the understanding of the local markets will not be there. The local market needs will not be properly understood if the investment bases are not located physically in Africa, rather they are located in Dubai. And the suitcase banking therefore has its own problems. It can work for the short term, but it won't be sustainable in the long term unless there are physical regional headquarters located in Africa itself. Another contender is Kenya. Kenya is seen as the technological hub, the East African hub. It has its own strengths. For example, it is termed to be the Silicon Savannah, as it has pioneered in innovations, especially the fintech sector innovations. For example, the M-Pesa. The M-Pesa is the mechanism through which people can deposit their cash and get the electronic money. The cash can be deposited with the recognized agents, for example, the mobile retailers, the barbers, even bakers, etc. And then the electronic money that they get access to, it can be sent to their family, friends, etc. by charging a fee, a levy. And it also has a high internet penetration. The digital connectivity in Kenya is one of the best in African continent, and in terms of regional access, it is seen to be the gateway to the East African market also. But it also faces its own challenges. For example, the high corruption and the bureaucratic red tape which is prevalent in Kenya, and it also goes through political instability also, which leads to policy uncertainty. For example, the caps on interest rates in Kenya, and it is having a limited scale as compared to South Africa, which is the largest economy in Africa in terms of GDP. Now, why are we focusing on Africa so much? Why do we need Africa? In times of global uncertainty, we need political cooperation, economic cooperation, security cooperation from the countries in the African continent also. In terms of political advantage that we'll get, we can become the leader of the global South bloc. For promoting the South-South cooperation, we are taking initiatives therefore like Asia-Africa Growth Corridor. It is an initiative of India and Japan. We are promoting cooperation with the African Development Bank, and will be able to get support for our permanent membership bid in the United Nations Security Council. Most of the countries in the African continent support India's permanent membership bid for the same, and in turn India also supports the Isulvini Consensus. The Isulvini Consensus or the agreement is the agreement among the African nations demanding for 2 permanent seats in the United Nations Security Council for the African continent also. And there is cooperation across regional organizations. For example, the Economic Community of the West African States, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, the BRICS, and the Organization for Islamic Cooperation. And there is need for the cooperation in the economic sphere also. For example, India imports energy. We import oil. Oil we can import from Nigeria also. And we import the minerals also, especially the critical minerals. The critical minerals can be imported from Africa. For example, cobalt from the Democratic Republic of Congo, the copper from Zambia. We can import the chromium and manganese from South Africa. And we have investments also in Africa, more than $30 billion. The Export Import Bank's Focus Africa program is to promote the economic cooperation between the two, and there is an India-Africa partnership project as well. The trade between India and Africa is close to $100 billion as of fiscal year 2023, and we can cooperate for the WTO negotiations also regarding the WTO issues, for example, the agriculture issues. And we need cooperation in the defense sector also. For example, ensuring maritime security, to counter piracy, and for the humanitarian as well as the disaster relief efforts in the Indian Ocean region. The cooperation is needed in the climate change as well as the technological sectors. For example, the cooperation across the initiatives like International Solar Alliance, the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, where India is leading, and we may be able to exert our soft power as well. As Africa grows from the continent of darkness to continent of growth, India can be a supporter of Africa in the growth story, and there are obviously the people-to-people ties, the cultural ties between India and the African continent. But the India-Africa relations face certain challenges also. For example, the region has become a ground of geopolitical contest. Various players are contesting there, for example, USA, Russia, China, Europe, Japan, Turkey, even United Arab Emirates. And they are vying for the partnerships with the African continent in the sectors including energy, minerals, security, etc. And the Chinese have become more and more assertive. They are projecting themselves as the infrastructure developer, resource provider, as well as the financer. Therefore, we will need to update our strategic vision with respect to the African continent. We will need more clarity in our strategy towards Africa, and we will be needing deeper pockets also, because the investments, the infrastructure investments that Africa needs will be huge, and we have also been marred by our lack of focus towards Africa. That was because we had the imperative to focus first on our neighborhood, consolidate first in Asia. At times there are people-to-people issues also. For example, the racial attacks on Africans, the occasional attacks on Africans in India. Now, what are the suggestions that can be given to improve the India-Africa relations? One, we can go for the political and diplomatic push. This push can come through the summits like India-Africa Forum summits, and we can expand the defense cooperation. For expanding the same, we can give them the lines of credit. The lines of credit can be given to expand India's defense exports into Africa, and we need to simultaneously increase the economic and the developmental cooperation and take up socio-cultural initiatives also. For example, the Indian Technical Economic Cooperation and the Indian Center for Cultural Relations, they give various scholarships to the African students. The scholarships can be named after the well-known African figures, and we can implement the roadmap 2030 to improve our relations with Africa. Now, there is a mains practice question as well. India's engagement with Africa is shaped by historical ties, evolving strategic interests, and a renewed focus on South-South cooperation. In this context, analyze the significance of India-Africa relations. What are the key challenges in deepening this partnership? Examine the role of South Africa as a strategic gateway to the African continent. Please try to write it. The next article is related to Shanghai Cooperation Organization. The context behind it is that the Defense Minister Rajnath Singh is participating in the SCO Defense Ministers meeting in China. This is important in GS2 under the topic Bilateral, Regional and Global Groupings and Agreements involving India or affecting India's interests. Now, let's discuss the origins of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization first. It was founded in 2001. Before that, the Shanghai 5 mechanism was put in place in 1996. It was created following the signing of agreement on confidence building in the military field in border areas between China, Russia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. Therefore, this is an political, economic and security alliance. In 2001, officially the SCO was established in Shanghai and Uzbekistan was accepted as a member state. In 2002, the SCO charter was signed during the St. Petersburg summit, and in 2012, Afghanistan was accepted as the observer and Turkey as the dialogue partner. In 2015, in UFA, the SCO development strategy until 2025 was also adopted. In 2017, India and Pakistan also became the full members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. In 2023, Iran became a full member, and in 2024, Belarus also became a member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Now, what is the aim of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization? It aims to resolve the border issues, therefore the political alliance. It also aims to fight terrorism. It aims to bolster the regional security, therefore the security alliance, and it also aims to counter the American influence in the Central Asian region. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization functions on the basis of the Shanghai spirit. That is, the member countries, they are supposed to work for the mutual benefit. They are supposed to take decisions based upon mutual trust, the consultation, the respect for the cultural diversity and the pursuit for the common development. The external policy of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is based upon the principles of non-alignment. That is, the members of SCO are not supposed to be aligned with any of the non-members of the SCO, and there should be no targeting of any third countries which are not a part of the SCO grouping, and based upon the openness. When we look at the significance of SCO, it accounts for the countries which include 42% of the world's population and have 23% of the global GDP share. The significance of the SCO is highlighted even more in terms of the wide areas of cooperation. The cooperation is sought in the matters of regional security, which is needed especially in the South Asia, and terrorism, of which India is also a victim, ethnic separatism, religious extremism, as well as regional development. It has immense strategic significance also because it can act as a catalyst for the regional integration in Asia. Within South Asia especially, the intra-regional trade is very low as compared to the Southeast Asia intra-regional trade, and it can promote the stability across borders as the border issues can be resolved amicably. The SCO provides a platform for the discussion, and we can improve the connectivity with respect to the India to Central Asia. When we compare it with Quad, there are shared military and security goals ensuring peace, and economic cooperation is promoted, for example, ensuring access to markets, technology as well as investment opportunities. Therefore, it can help in the multilateral diplomacy. It can serve as a platform where India can engage with China also, and will be able to boost our relations with the Central Asia. Also, why the SCO is important? Because it can be seen as the eastern counterbalance to the western NATO. It enhances the security cooperation among members, ensuring the dealing with terrorism, particularly the Islamic State terrorists, increasing the economic cooperation in the region, and India is already wanting to connect with the Central Asia through the international north-south transport corridor. But there are certain challenges that the Shanghai Cooperation Organization faces. For example, we have to balance our ties with China and Russia. India is simultaneously the member of the Quad also. Therefore, we have to balance the ties, plus we have to maintain our strategic autonomy, not take decisions under the influence of any major power. There is the issue of sovereignty also, because China is leading with the initiative of its Belt and Road Initiative, which causes sovereignty concerns for India as it passes through Pakistan occupied Kashmir, which is an integral part of India. And we have low bilateral trade with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization countries. There are regional security concerns also, for example, the spread of terrorism, extremism, religious extremism especially, and we need to manage our relations with Pakistan, especially after the recent conflict. We also need to ensure the economic benefits that we get if we are participating in the SCO, for example, getting market access, building infrastructure as well as connectivity. Another issue is the traditional hostility between India and Pakistan and India's objections with respect to the China's One Belt One Road initiative. Now, what can be the suggestions that can be given so that India can effectively utilize the SCO platform? One, we can improve our connectivity with the Central Asian republics. For example, the Dushanbe-Chortut highway in Tajikistan. And we can seek a land corridor through Pakistan to get direct access to Central Asia, not only the indirect route via Iran and Afghanistan. We can promote the bilateral trade in national currencies to reduce the dependence upon the US dollar, and we can also build upon our goodwill in the Central Asian region and also build upon the humanitarian ties. There is a means practice question as well. In the backdrop of growing global geopolitical uncertainty, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization presents both opportunities and challenges for India. Discuss the significance of SCO for India in this evolving global order. What are the key challenges that India faces within the SCO framework? Suggest a way forward for India's effective engagement. Please try to write it. The next article is related to the emergency and the imposition of emergency in India. This is important in GS1 under the topic Post-Independence India. The constitution was used to subvert the democracy at the time of the imposition of emergency. The actions taken by the regime at that time, they were seemingly within the legal framework. The law in theory technically allowed for that. For example, the Article 352, which is used to impose the national emergency, was invoked on the grounds of internal disturbance. It was allowed at that time. And also, the High Court of Allahabad had passed an order observing that the election of Indira Gandhi as a member of parliament was invalid, but the Supreme Court had provided for a conditional stay on the High Court order. And Indira Gandhi continued as the Prime Minister. Also, under Rule 12 of the Government of India Transaction of Business Rules 1961, any matter could be taken directly to the President by bypassing the other rules, and it could be ratified later on by the Cabinet. Therefore, the matter of the imposition of emergency was directly taken by the Prime Minister to the President at that time, circumventing the Cabinet. Therefore, the actions taken, they were seemingly within the legal framework. Now let's observe the module of emergency also. At that time, there was a weaponization of laws. For example, more than 1 lakh people were detained under the preventive detention laws. The chief preventive detention law being the MISA Act, the Maintenance of Internal Security Act, and there was indefinite incarceration which was allowed under the MISA Act without even disclosing the grounds of arrest to the detainee. And the 39th Constitutional Amendment Act even put the MISA Act under the 9th schedule. That is, it could not be reviewed by the judiciary as the laws inserted in the 9th schedule at that time were beyond the judicial review. And the 39th Constitutional Amendment Act even put the election of the President, Vice President, Prime Minister and the Speaker beyond the purview of the judicial review. Also, at the time of emergency, there was the subversion of the judicial independence. For example, the government promoted the notion of the committed judiciary. The judges who agreed with this notion, with this idea of the government were appointed, and there was even the overlooking of the judges in the promotion. For example, Justice Beg was appointed as the Chief Justice of India, overlooking Justice H.R. Khanna at that time. There was also an erosion of the rule of the law because of an unequal application of the laws and an executive aggrandizement. For example, there was the slogan which was floated at that time that Indira is India and India is Indira. Therefore, it was a fusion of the personality and the state, which is not allowed in a democracy. So what lessons did we learn from the emergency imposition in India? That democracy is a legal construct and it requires accountability and rule of law, and they are enforced through a functioning political opposition, an independent judiciary, a free press and a robust civil society. Now let's go into the background and learn a few basics regarding Article 352 as well, which provides for the imposition of the national emergency. Under Article 352, national emergency can be imposed if there are threats due to war, external aggression or armed rebellion. That is, the emergency can be due to the external threats as well as due to the internal threats. The external emergency can be imposed on the grounds of war or external aggression, and the internal emergency on the ground of armed rebellion if it is endangering India's security. There can be a preemptive declaration also even before the actual threat, the actual act has been carried out. Now, what is the procedure for the approval? The imposition of the national emergency has to be approved by a special majority in both the houses, the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, within 1 month of its imposition. If the Lok Sabha is dissolved at the time of imposition, then the approval must be given within 30 days of the reconstitution of the new Lok Sabha, and meanwhile the Rajya Sabha must have approved it. The duration of the emergency can be initially for a period of 6 months, and there can be an extension of 6 months every time if the parliament approves the same. Now, what can be the impacts of the national emergency? In terms of the executive impact, the center can give directions to the state regarding the governance in various matters. In terms of legislation also, there will be impact, as the parliament can legislate on any matter which is contained in the state list, where usually the state legislatures only are competent to legislate in normal times. The financial arena also sees an impact, as the president can modify the center state revenue distribution in the time of national emergency, and there can be term extensions also. The Lok Sabha, which is usually formed for a period of 5 years, it can be extended 1 year at a time and maximum up to 6 months post emergency, and state assemblies can also be extended by similar durations. The effect on the fundamental rights of the emergency is also there, that Article 358 suspends Article 19 during war or during external aggression, and the Article 359 provides that the president can, through a presidential order, suspend the court enforcement of specified rights except Articles 20 and Article 21. Now, regarding the revoking of the national emergency, again the provisions are provided within Article 352 subclause 2 and subclause 7. The president has the power to revoke the national emergency without the approval of the parliament, and it can also automatically lapse if it is not extended within a period of 6 months. The national emergency in India has been imposed in 1962 during the time of Indo-China War, then in 1971 when Bangladesh was liberated and there was the Indo-Pak War, and in 1975 when it was due to the political unrest, internal emergency. The next article is related to the Godavari dispute. This is important in GS2 under the topic Dispute Redressal Mechanisms and Institutions. Before coming to the article, let's discuss a few basics regarding the Godavari river. The largest basin area of Godavari is there in Maharashtra, followed by Andhra Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, Odisha, Karnataka, and then Puducherry. The tributaries of the Godavari river on the left bank include Penganga, which originates in the Ajanta hills and it joins the Wardha river. The Vainganga originates in the Mahadev hills, it also joins the Wardha river, and the Wardha river which originates in the Satpura hills. The Pranhita is the largest tributary of the Godavari and it covers 34% of its basin, and it combines the waters of Penganga, Wardha and Vainganga. Indravati is also a left bank tributary of Godavari and it forms the boundary between Chhattisgarh and Maharashtra. The other left bank tributaries of Godavari are Purna, Indravati and Sabri. The right bank tributaries of Godavari include Manjira, on which the Nizam Sagar reservoir is located and it originates in the Balaghat range. The other right bank tributary is Pravara. Now, coming to the article, it is related to the Polavaram Bankacherla link project dispute. This project aims to divert 200 TMC feet of Godavari water to Krishna and Penna basin, and the beneficiary of this will be the drought hit region of Andhra Pradesh, the Rayalaseema region of Andhra Pradesh. 50% of this project will be funded by the central government under the river interlinking project. And if we look at the current status, the pre-feasibility report has already been submitted to the Central Water Commission and the detailed project report is awaited. But Telangana is objecting to the link project. There are legal and political concerns regarding it, as Telangana alleges that it violates the riparian rights under the Andhra Pradesh Reorganization Act 2014. There are also concerns regarding the FRBM borrowing limits, as the center reduced the Telangana's borrowing capacity, citing the Kaleshwaram project, but it has allowed Andhra Pradesh to borrow beyond the FRBM limit also. Therefore, it is leading to a political blame game, as the current regime there blames the previous government for having accepted that link project. The other arguments are that it can lead to various apprehensions, as the diversion plan could alter the water allocation in future tribunal rulings. And the Retired Engineers Association has suggested that first, the Telangana's pending projects can be cleared which are there before the approval of the Polavaram Bankacherla, and we can also compensate Telangana with 200 TMC feet of Krishna water as well. Now, what is the defense of Andhra Pradesh regarding this link project? It claims that the Godavari has surplus water and it loses 3000 TMC feet annually to the sea. We can utilize it for irrigation, even for the drinking water purposes, and it sets a precedent also. The earlier precedent was the diversion of Krishna water to the Penna basin, and the project is critical for drinking water as well as irrigation in the Rayalaseema region, the region in Andhra Pradesh. The broader implications can be that the center's role will be critical here, as it has to ensure that the mediation that it provides, it should be unbiased, and the interstate water disputes, they can cause economic as well as sentimental tensions also, which need to be navigated. There is a previous year question also regarding the same. Consider the following rivers: Vansdhara, Indravati, Pranita, Pennar. Which of the above are the tributaries of Godavari? Please try to answer it. The next article is related to the West Asian reset, which is seen as a de-escalation by the world. This is important in GS2 under the topic Effect of Politics and Policies of Developing and Developed Countries on India's Interests. The current situation in the West Asia is that Israel and USA bombed Iran, and it had the tacit global approval because the global powers EU, Russia, China, they were silent, and it has neutralized the Iran's nuclear threat for the time being, and Israel is upcoming as the sole regional nuclear power in the region, and there are about 40,000 US troops also in the West Asian region. Therefore, they are ensuring the Israeli security dominance. Therefore, Israel is backed by USA. The Gulf states, they are experiencing a dilemma. Previously, they were afraid of Iran because it had a nuclear program going on. The fear from Iran was more than the fear from Israel, and they relied on USA and Israel for the balance. But now there is the unchecked Israeli power in the West Asia. The Abraham Accords are progressing to make peace, but the Palestine issue has been sidelined. There has been a weak opposition from the Gulf states. They have been silent on the Palestine issue as they want economic integration with Israel and USA. More than 50,000, about 56,000 people have been killed in Gaza, and the West Bank settler expansions have been going on there. And if there is a proper annexation of these regions by Israel, it can lead to a regional stability risk also. How has Iran responded? Iran has retaliated. It has conducted missile strikes on the US bases in both Qatar as well as Iraq. The response, it claims, has been proportionate. It has matched the bomb count. There is an existential crisis for Tehran regime also, as it does not have the surrender option for survival. There is a risk of further escalation also. For example, the potential closure of the Strait of Hormuz, even the potential withdrawal of Iran from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. So the USA brokered the ceasefire. The surprise ceasefire call came after the retaliation from Iran, and the Gulf states have now a wake-up call. They need to mediate. It is a must for them to mediate to prevent the collapse of Iran, just like Libya or Iraq, which can lead it to becoming a breeding ground for the terrorists or the warring factions sprouting in Iran. And the nuclear deal talks may be revived, but that will need the support of the other Gulf countries in the region, which will be crucial. Now, when we look at the next moves of Benjamin Netanyahu, he may go for the Palestinian annexation. After the strike on Iran, he has got a boost. He has got the revival in the domestic politics, and his plan for the Eretz Israel is on track. He wants to annex the West Bank and the Gaza before 2026 US elections. So what can be the future scenarios when we look at the situation there? One, Israel can become an apartheid state. where the Palestinians can be treated as second-class citizens. Another option can be it can become a genuine democracy, which historically looking, if you look at the background of Israel, does not seem to be very likely. What has been India's stance? We have adopted a pragmatic approach. We have not strongly condemned Israeli strikes because Israel has supported us in the past, and we have gone for a balanced diplomacy. We have close ties with Israel and we have strategic projects with Iran also. For example, our investments in the Chabahar port and the need for Iran for connecting with the Central Asian region, and we called for de-escalation, therefore we have adopted a neutral stance. The next article is related to the Global Sustainable Development Goals rankings, which have been published by the UN SDSN. This is important in GS3 under the topic Sustainable Development. India's rankings have improved in the SDG index. The 2025 SDG index rates India at the 99th position. It is the first time that India has entered into the top 100. It is out of 167 countries. The score of India is 67 out of 100 in terms of the SDG achievements. We were placed at 109th position in 2024 and 112th in 2023. Therefore, we have been increasing our growth rapidly. When we compare with the other powers, China is ranked at the 49th place and USA at the 44th place in the SDG index. The neighbors are not that well placed. For example, Maldives at 53rd, Bhutan at 74th, Nepal at 85th, Sri Lanka at 93rd, and Bangladesh and Pakistan are behind India. The global SDG trends indicate that the top performance have been the Nordic countries, that is number 1 Finland followed by Sweden and Denmark. 19 out of the top 20 countries in the SDG index are the European nations, and the fastest progress since 2015 in Asia is shown by Nepal followed by Cambodia and Bangladesh. But there are certain challenges in terms of the achievements of the SDG index. Only 17% of the SDG targets are on track globally. There have been certain reversals also. The progress made has been lost in certain SDGs, for example, increasing obesity rates included within SDG 2, press freedom and corruption as well. When we look at the multilateral commitments, the major powers have lagged behind. The top 3 have been the small countries like Barbados, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago. Within G20, the best multilateral commitment is shown by Israel, and OECD best commitment shown by Chile. USA is ranked at 193rd place because in terms of multilateral commitments, it is going back. It opposes the Sustainable Development Goals. It has exited the Paris Agreement and even WHO also. But there are certain strong areas, the progress areas. For example, progress has been made in basic services and infrastructure. For example, expanding mobile broadband services, electricity access, and the reduction in child mortality. Simultaneously, there are setbacks, for example, climate and biodiversity. In terms of the climate and biodiversity conservation, even the top ranked nations have struggled, and the unsustainable consumption have risen in the developed countries. The next article is related to the revenue of panchayats, as the Home Minister has asked the Chief Ministers of various states to find ways to increase the revenue of the panchayats. This is important in GS2 under the topic Devolution of Powers and Finances up to the local levels and the challenges therein. What are the sources of revenue of the panchayats? They can generate revenue by imposing fines, by getting income from the resources of Gram Panchayat, disposal of properties from government schemes, funds for institutional management, income from government revenue, income from government property, gifts or contribution from other sources, interest and profit from investments, government grants, by imposing taxes, toll fees, finance commission grants and the market complexes, etc. When we look at the own revenue generation, the own revenue generation for the Jila Panchayats is 0% as compared to the village Panchayats, for which the own revenue generation is about 48% as observed by the Directorate of Panchayat from 2016 to 2021. Now, what are the issues in the finances of the Panchayati Raj institutions? As per the observations of the Comptroller and Auditor General of India, the own revenue generation is limited, as the Jila Panchayats have no own revenue generation and they depend entirely on the government grants. Whereas the village Panchayats, their revenue potential is underutilized because the property taxes have not been revised. The collection mechanisms are inefficient and the arrears are not recovered. Simultaneously, the dependence on government grants is so huge that even the delays in the Central Finance Commission grants leads to problems, and there is a poor monitoring of the Central Finance Commission grant utilization. There is also uneven release of the state government grants. The State Finance Commission mechanism is weak as there are delays in the constitution of the State Finance Commissions itself, and then the non-implementation of the recommendations given by the State Finance Commission to the state governments. The state government does not release the money, and there are budgeting and financial management issues also. The Jilla Panchayats, they fail to prepare the budgets. The village panchayats, they prepare unrealistic budgets, and the financial tools are not adopted. For example, the model accounting system, the MAS, is not used in the Jilla Panchayats. The Priya Soft and the eGram Swaraj, they are used only in the Central Finance Commission grants in the village panchayats. The financial sustainability is also challenging. For example, the majority of the village panchayats are unable to cover the establishment expenses from their own revenues, dependent upon the government for that also, the establishment expenses, and there is increased reliance on the grants due to the weak fiscal autonomy as well. Thank you.